And now I'd like to introduce our speakers for today, Taylor Speegle and Dylan Stroud, co-founders of MAKERMONSTER.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As Danica introduced, my voice is Taylor Speegle.
I'm Dylan.
And here we're talking about what we focus on, which is apps and websites. And hopefully the goal of this call and this webinar is really to help educate those that have websites, which should be all of you on the call today and listening to this in the future, as well as mobile applications, get a sense of what's going on within the industry and what you can do to assess your own company and how you're leveraging both of those tools to better enhance your business overall. So to dig in to a bit about our own studio itself, we are MakerMonster Studios. What we do specifically is mobile app design and development, as well as website design and development. So this is what we do day in and day out. And so Dylan and myself, we've been focusing on this for over 7 years. Of the applications that we've launched, for both ourselves and for clients, we have over 18 million downloads. Our work has been covered by Forbes, Huffington Post, amongst others. We've had #1 app in Japan, #6 app, utilities app here in the US. And really, ultimately, this is what we love to do. So hopefully you'll be able to take some lessons from this. This is what we live and breathe every day. And so with that, we'll move on to kind of our first area of focus.
Okay, so if there's really, I would say if there's one takeaway that we really want to harp on here, it's attention. This is something that I think often gets overlooked, and it's the #1 consideration we make when we start to consider apps and websites and businesses in the technology space. Wherever your audience's attention is, that is where you want to be. What we're talking about here is more and more people are spending more and more time on their devices. They're spending more and more time in general just inundated by an oversaturation of information, whether it be through social media, TV. We're constantly being bombarded by advertisements, marketing, different types of stimulation that can pull our attention away. And so as businesses today and sort of the modern world, it's very important that we understand where our demographic and our customers' attention is and really firmly plant ourselves within that space. So that being said, because it is the space to be right now is really online, the scope of which you can reach a lot more people. There's also a lot more competition. And so generally speaking, in today's world, because everyone's constantly pulling out their phones, spending time online, you absolutely want to have some sort of online presence, whether that be on a website or a mobile app, in some cases both. That being said, there's a lot of competition these days. So there really is, and this is what we have here on this slide, there's a lot less space for clunky and unrefined products. So if you are going to exist on this space, if you're going to bring your business into the online world, you really want to make sure that you really harp on design, make sure that it's something that truly demands and keeps your customers' attention.
And with those trends, really focusing on where users' attentions are. If you look at your own daily life, this may also reflect, but it's really mobile. And so whether it's web or whether it's an app, mobile is still the key platform that is increasingly growing and getting the attention of most consumers in the marketplace. So there are over 2 billion smartphones in the world. That number is probably soon to about surpass the 2.5 billion phone mark. And this is especially true when you look internationally. So not only do most people in the US increasingly have a smartphone, but as you look internationally, a lot of these countries don't even have desktop computers or laptops. They've skipped that entire step of what we've experienced here in the US, and that is now the global medium by which people digest internet technology and information and digest that today. Americans specifically, showing how much this permeates in everyday life, they check their phone on average once every 12 minutes or about 80 times a day. And if you actually segment some areas of demographics, you can actually get that number quite quickly up to over 200 or almost 250 times a day, depending on who you're looking at, which is an astounding number when you really look in the history of where people's attention have been historically. Prior, when it's a traditional brick and mortar store, if you're a restaurant, you want to be on a heavily trafficked street corner as people walking by. Today, you have the ability to be in front of consumers not only while they're walking around, oftentimes you'll see people's heads are in their phones as it is, but also at their home, both in the morning and in the evening when they're coming and starting to make some of those other types of decisions. With mobile apps specifically, just to kind of show that growth, there's been over 200 billion app downloads in 2017. That number is increasing for 2018, as you would predict. And with that, kind of that last stat we have here is what that translates to is while not necessarily every consumer looking on their phone is ready to transact, that is where they mostly are starting their exploratory process. So whether you're a law firm, whether you're an e-commerce website, whether you're a bank, people's research on who they want to work with often begins on their phone. If I look to myself, I am often sitting at home on my couch with a laptop next to me, a TV available, yet I am still on my phone, on that mobile device, doing research for my next vacation or my next purchase.
All right, so in this next one, we're looking at problem-solution fit. Speaking again to attention, and one last note on what Taylor was saying a moment ago, we're even finding, the people's attention shifts over time. It started that their major attention was with radio, and then it was TV. The old adage is marketers ruin everything. So generally, the more inundated we get with marketing and stimulation, we start to switch to new things. Over these years, it's definitely moved into the app and website space, and as we've been discussing so far, the important thing is understanding where your customer's attention is. However, it isn't enough anymore with how much competition there is in the space to simply be in the right place and to understand where your user's attention is. You really need to make sure that you understand the problem and that whatever solution you're proposing or your business is proposing is a real solution. With whatever product you end up with, whether that be a mobile app or a website, one thing that we really like to encourage is to make sure that you're constantly testing whether a product, your business, is actually delivering values to your customers once it's out and about. So it's not enough to just build it, put it out there, and just let it sit there. You really want to iterate upon that, make sure that it's, and constantly try to improve whatever conversion you're trying to make with them. The next question that we like to ask really is just whether or not whatever problem you're solving is best solved on mobile app or website. There's a lot of different considerations here when you're thinking through this, and so definitely recommend doing some in-depth research on this piece, and we'll speak a little bit to that in a few minutes here. But really consider, just for, I guess, a short version of this is understanding whatever problem you're trying to solve. Let's say, for example, it's best solved by having instant access to a camera. That would most likely be best solved using a mobile app because it's just instant access to a camera and you always know that you're going to have control of that. And so it'll be a much more efficient solution in that regard. So the last piece, sort of goes hand in hand with the first. So, how do you test a product or service to make sure that it's actually accomplishing what you want? And the answer is obviously through data. And so what you're going to be doing and what we recommend you do is really seek to understand your customers as best you can and how they are using your product. Track every metric you can. Really think about how they're using, how often they're going to your site or app, what are they clicking on, how are they liking it. Establish as many feedback loops as you can to understand how you can improve your product and build a community around it. The stronger your community and the more iterations you have the opportunity to get through, the more likely you are to scale, improve your business, and potentially scale to, the size of some larger app companies that are out there. We can go ahead and go to the next one.
So going on to the world of case studies,
Yeah.
So just a couple of specific use cases for this. So
in these cases, obviously up here we have Snapchat, Adobe. There's a lot of different examples for each of these. One that actually comes to mind at this exact moment is actually Airbnb. So really what we're trying to do here is just illustrate what we mean when we're talking about problem-solution fit or product market fit. The Airbnb team, they were originally known as Air Bed and Breakfast, and actually I believe it was 5 or 6 years that they were sitting on this same idea. Today they're basically a household name. They've become a massive company with huge valuations and a scale that few apps honestly have reached. And so what's interesting is while they were sitting on the correct idea, they hadn't correctly figured out the problem-solution fit yet. And so what goes into that? Obviously, making sure that you're on the right platforms, Are you on mobile app, web, or both? Wherever your users are and wherever they're most likely to go when they're in their time of need, you need to be there and be established. It took them a little bit of time to appropriately develop their platforms in that regard. And then lastly, the second point is the actual execution upon that. Again, it's not enough to simply be in those places. They had to iterate and iterate and iterate until they finally figured it out. Initially, about 5 years in, they started to find business because they were targeting campaigns and hotels were overbooking. And so they found an immediate problem that they could solve where when hotels were overbooked, they would start to target houses in the area. But they found themselves making more money off of the branded cereal boxes that came along than the actual business that they were trying to make. So it was a bit of an uphill battle. Once they had actually established getting the correct execution and location, that is when they actually started, to basically have an overnight success.
Okay. So digging a little bit more into kind of the breakdown between websites and mobile apps. So why your business needs a website? Hopefully anyone who will ever listen to this or watch this has a website. It is very difficult for us to figure out a scenario where a website, especially given the low hurdle cost of at least having some platform up there, every business should have a website with reason. It's serving today as your digital storefront. And again, oftentimes people, before they even take a step inside potentially a brick and mortar store of yours, they initially go to your website to see at least first impressions. What are the services offered? That's the first impression of your brand. And so from a brand recognition perspective, that is going to be your imprint on the consumer, and more often than not, their first impression of who you are. Or at least, even if you engage with them on an in-person basis, that's going to be their next step when they receive a business card or when they initially walk into your store or have a conversation with you. They'll often immediately go to the website to get that initial impression to see what kind of quality is sitting behind that product or brand. In terms of customer engagement, so again, in-person can only go so far. That allows for you to permeate every aspect of their life if they so choose to reach out to you, right? And so having things like contact forms on there, or at least the information available, allows them, once they have that initial interaction with you, to potentially go back at any time in the morning, at work, in the evening, because of the digital platform, to be able to go into that and further engage your customer via that level of information. And overall, you can stand out from the competition through your website. So even if you're a company that might leverage or lean heavily on platforms such as Yelp, which often almost some people think that may substitute to a degree kind of the need for a website, oftentimes those people will initially, as they're making that assessment, go to your website to see that next quality level and to see what your brand and what your company represents and stands for. So making sure that information is coherent, clear, and refined. It's incredibly important. That can help be the differentiating factor between two companies that sell the exact same quality product. That could be the break, whether your website is more easy to use or it's just visually more appealing. That could be a big differentiator there. And ultimately, the point of a website, it should be working for you. It's there to generate a lead. Whatever your customer may be, it should be there to either convert on the site or at least serve as a support factor as you look to convert later down the pipeline. Digging a bit more into the mobile app front. So mobile apps specifically, these are downloaded from most commonly Google Play Store and Android and the Apple iOS App Store. And so these are pieces of software that are permanently downloaded onto the phone. And with that, that can be both, you can download information on there, so you can potentially be connected to the user even when there's not an internet connection available. And there's a lot of other advantages to specifically having a mobile app. A lot of you have likely already experienced those. So first, going on this, where your customers are. People with mobile apps are those with mobile phones. Most of us have that, and if that's where your customer's attention is, it's important to be potentially in that medium. You can create a higher conversion experience oftentimes with a mobile app by reducing steps of friction. Some examples of that specifically are not only can you curate and customize the design a little bit more specifically of your software itself, but you can leverage some of the features that are within the app, such as Apple Pay for those who have iPhones. And so that's a step in the process where if you can get them onto your app and you want them to transact, you save them potentially 50 keystrokes in terms of order transact, it's 1 or 2 clicks, and they are able to actually go through with that transaction and that purchase. So that's, again, one of the value adds. Going a bit more into the feature side, a lot of those you've probably experienced as well. So you can access the camera quite easily. You can access location services, so you can know exactly where your consumers are, potentially track that information for them. Something like Snapchat leverages that to have curated filters.
Geolocation.
And so there's a lot of really fun tools that you can explore and open up to the full potential of these amazing pieces of devices that sit in our pockets. You can have full access to those features that are available today. Again, push notifications allow you to proactively market and reach out to your consumer rather than reactively. That's a major piece between websites and apps.
On an individual basis as well, specific customers even that are doing specific things on your app, it gives you a lot of opportunity to reach out to them directly.
And so while somebody's sitting on their couch, or if there's a peak time at which people are ready to transact, you can send them a push notification specifically to Dylan Stroud, for example, and send him something based on his historical data. You can send him a customly curated push notification to help either provide a tip, a trick, remind them of your brand, or actually go and transact. And having an app can be a major differentiator in the marketplace to help you stand out. And so while it all comes down to an ROI and whether an app makes sense, most businesses that we've encountered could benefit from an app, but it really comes down to priorities. And so in a lot of scenarios, let's say you're a bank, it's kind of a big example there, is if your bank does not have a mobile application, it should. If you look at any major bank in the marketplace, and we've encountered those that don't, is that mobile app can be a differentiator, right? Because that it opens up a lot of convenient features and functionality. Or if there's no one in your competition set that has a mobile app, having one could be one of those standout differentiators that really shows that you're ahead of the game, that you can capture an audience a bit more aggressively. So there's a lot of advantages and benefits with mobile apps specifically.
Oftentimes as well, even if your company is not consumer facing, there's still potentially benefits, again, understanding your ROI and understanding where your priorities are. There may still be benefits to having a mobile app within your space of some kind. So for example, we have run into businesses who found that they could improve performance of people out on the field by creating iPad apps and basically ways to track their locations and communicate back and forth, real-time notes, all kinds of tools and utilities that you can create for your team to help improve. There might be some stuff that's already out there that you can use, but occasionally a custom app for that can also really benefit and streamline your business as well. And so, yeah.
So going into your own business. So if you're looking at your business today, you should have a website. If you don't, get one. Or you may already have a mobile app. You may have both. And so what can you do beyond what we've already kind of mentioned? What are some quick checks that you can do to see if you're still relevant within the marketplace? And so we'll just kind of tackle a couple of these, and feel free after you see this, go and check out your product to see if it's working for you. So starting with visual design. So this is the aesthetic, right? It's kind of that quick check gut look of, does it look like it's from 1990, or does it look like it's from today? I will certainly say that we've encountered many businesses with those that have websites that clearly have not been touched or looked at in years. And it shows, even 3 years or 2 years, even a year, and oftentimes, if it hasn't gotten content updates or hasn't gotten a fresh look, it's beginning to look out of date. And that pace at which things are changing is increasing. And so if that's not something you've looked at, this is a really easy check. Go and see what you see on Google or on Kayak and a lot of these big kind of modern sites. Do a gut check at that visual appeals and take a look at yours. Or, a great one, look at your competition. What is the best competitor in the marketplace? Who's at the top of the food chain? Take a look at theirs and see how yours visually stacks up. Going into the next piece is user experience. That is how the structure and how the app or the website functions. And so that is really, for example, if you sell a product, if you're kind of an e-commerce platform, how easy is it for a user to go on, find the product that they want, and transact? It should be very streamlined, it should be logical, and if anyone's ever confused on your website or app, that's an indicator that you need to rethink it, right? And it's getting out there, getting in front of people, asking opinions, is a great way to do that. People shouldn't go on your website and be searching for a long period of time for the core information that they want. There's a lot of tools and a lot of smart ways that you can build a website to actually have less information, yet have it be more valuable to the end consumer.
I think a good way to think about user experience and friction for your company is really thinking about your physical location. It's almost like rooms in your building or rooms in a house. You want to make sure that it's laid out in such a way, and the reason we use the term friction here, in such a way that it's very efficient to move from any given point. So the idea would be, if there's one piece of advice here, this is paramount, is to make sure that it takes the fewest number of taps possible from any given moment for a user to transact or accomplish something in your app. Generally, this leads to a simpler, more intuitive product, and is probably the single highest likelihood to retain your customers, excite them, make it clear and easy if they're new, and also just increase your conversion rates in general. So whether that be if you're trying to have them transact or simply take a picture, the simpler and less friction you can create for the user, the better off your product's going to be and the tighter hold they'll have on their daily life.
Okay. Tackling through SEO and ASO strategy. If you don't know what SEO is, that's a great example of something that you should be addressing. So that stands for Search Engine Optimization. ASO is the equivalent just in the app space, App Store Optimization. And so what this is think of Google rankings. When somebody searches law firm Las Vegas, if you are a law firm in Las Vegas, you want to be on the first page of Google, ideally at the top. And with that, it takes a strategy. It's a very active endeavor. So those are things like making sure you have a well-built and well-structured website with a lot of keywords that are very relevant to your industry. You want to make sure you have healthy traffic going to your site, that you're updating content across not only your website, but social media platforms linking back to your website. There's a lot of tactics that you can easily look up online and learn a lot about SEO tactics, best practices. And it is something that is ongoing, and as long as you have an app or a website, should always be in your frame of reference. Because if you have a website, but the only people going there are the people you've already made a direct relationship with, it's not working for you the way it can. Ideally, you have a fair percentage of organic traffic searching for those types of keywords. Likely they're searching for it initially on their phone, on Google, of just trying to find businesses like yourself. So you want to make sure you have an overall SEO and ASO strategy. Conversion, we've spoken a lot about what leads up to this, is effectively conversion is you want your website to work for you, whatever your conversion rate is. If it is customers buying something on your website, if it is customers going there to validate your brand and then coming into your shop, the conversion factor is very important. And you should have some sort of analytics reporting to show how many people come to your site, where are they coming from, how long do they spend on your site. There's a lot of tools that you can implement on your site without metrics and visibility. It's really hard to see and optimize conversion, but all the other things that we've mentioned help obviously lead to conversion. Content recency and frequency, you should update your content frequently, and there should be a robust amount of content to make sure that's there. So in terms of blog posts, items like that, a lot of that ties to SEO, but content is king. Make sure you have the right content. It doesn't have to be based on sheer quantity, but make sure it's clean, concise content that a user can digest. And as we mentioned before, you versus the competition, look at your competition frequently, right? Competition can be a good and healthy thing and inspire you on how to build better products and how to better compete in the marketplace. You can even use tools online that are free, like App Annie and Simple Web, that will give you analytics about how their websites are doing. So feel free to type in yours, type in theirs, and see how your competition is doing and maybe learn a thing or two from them.
Great. So, and one piece on I guess the last thing, okay, well, I guess we'll just jump onto this. So this is kind of a funny little quote here. Frosting on a turd is still a turd. So, and actually Steve Jobs said something similar. Basically, you baked a really lovely cake and used turd for frosting, something like that. The idea here, it's a combination of two different things. So if you're building a product and it's really well built, but its visual design is off, it's still not going to be very useful and effective. And vice versa here, if you've built something terrible and it looks really nice, it's still not going to be very effective. So, the idea is in a perfect world, you will build something that's in the correct place. It's on web, apps, or both. it's built well, the structure of it's well, it's hopefully very simple and efficient and really easy to convert users, and then it's also beautiful. It just doesn't leave space for someone to come in and sort of take over or challenge your company.
Okay, so just to kind of recap the items we've talked about is you want to be where your customer is, where their eyes are, where their attention is. This is kind of marketing 101. Where is that today? Most of it is through digital platforms or frequently through digital platforms, and most often starting on a mobile device. So with that, it's really just focus on and pay attention because your consumer may be different from your next door neighbor and so on. So make sure you're always getting in front of where their eyes are. And once you have their attention, you have to make sure you are creating the solution that best fits those needs. So specifically in the areas of apps and websites, right? Figuring out what's the best mix, what's the best platform, and how to use that platform best to communicate with that client. So sometimes, often a two-prong approach with an app and a website plus your brick and mortar shop is a great way to overall tackle that, right? Mobile web can kind of have a universal grab of clientele. Most people can access it. And those really loyal customers, if you're wanting to build loyal, consistent customers, oftentimes mobile apps can be that great solution and access additional features and tools to help you retain those customers, not just get their initial attention. And if you're on web, if you have a website, oftentimes companies are now building their websites mobile first. And so your website should be mobile responsive, which means if you look at it on a laptop or a desktop, and then when you look at it on a phone, everything should scale appropriately to make sure it looks just as clean and just as digestible on a phone versus a desktop computer. And a lot of companies, as I mentioned, are leading with mobile first, designing and thinking about how their website and how their app should look, obviously, on a mobile device before even considering the desktop piece. And all of that is kind of a fluid part of that process today. And assess what you have often. Iterate often, figure out, look at competition, look at your website, look at competition and assess, is my website doing what I want it to do? Are people going there organically? Does anybody do anything on my website? Ask friends, families, customers about your business and get their honest opinion about your website. Constantly assess all the aspects that we've mentioned on this call to make sure that you're actively engaged with that platform because it can have huge benefits in terms of driving customers to your business.
And I guess a closing thought on this iteration piece, I would say the number one thing that we see that leads to the highest likelihood of success is simply the number of at-bats, the number of iterations any given business makes. So if you're working on your website, you're working on your app, you're considering one or the other or both, really think about how you're going to continue to iterate and improve your product because the more times you swing at the ball, the higher likelihood you're actually going to make contact and dig in and start to make a difference for your business.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time on the call. If there's any questions, we'll certainly field those. And if there's any questions that come after this, you can always reach out to, obviously, the Las Vegas Chamber of Commerce. They have incredible resources for you. And you can reach us at our website, MAKERMONSTER.com, and our email is listed below as well.
Well, thank you so much for the presentation. I thought it was super informative. It looks like we do have one question that was asked. So I think there was a question brought up about the use of mobile devices versus household income. So if there's any data to talk about for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So which mobile devices, just to clarify?
I'm not sure. I mean, maybe for a disparity of who's using mobile devices.
Right.
Versus.
Yeah, we absolutely see, and there's a lot of variability here. Taylor, I'll let you speak to this, but my initial thoughts are, from what we've seen, generally speaking, the iOS ecosystem, Apple, has a higher cost for entry than Android overall. And so their market share generally has a higher disposable income. There's obviously variables and variations to this, outliers, but in the Android space, an important consideration, there's top-of-the-line phones that can cost you $1,000, $800. You can spend quite a bit on an Android phone, just as much oftentimes as an Apple phone. However, there's also, Android is more of an open platform. They had a very different strategy when going to market. And so they sell dollar phones even cheaper than that in some cases in countries. So, if you have the exact same audience on Apple versus Android, you're more likely to have some percentage of the Android, at least in my experience, where their disposable income is lower generally. But there's a lot of variance there.
Yeah, and I would agree to that. The exact statistics I can't cite, but when you look at those two platforms, Android is universal. When you look globally, there are far more Android devices in the world because of that low cost of entry from a smartphone market. So when you're looking at mobile, that means a lot, especially when you're thinking of mobile apps, because iOS apps, even though there are, I think, ballpark about 10% as many, 10% of the Android devices for the same number of iPhones are out there in the world. And so for every 10 iPhones, there's 100 Android devices. The conversion, profitability conversion on apps and purchases and so on Apple's App Store significantly outweighs Android sales. So
generally, some businesses do better and serve better on Android, but in a lot of our experience, the disposable income, the amount of time they spend in their apps, the higher likelihood of converting and actually clicking an ad or buying something is just generally higher on average. That might have something to do with their income. It's a little hard to say, but regardless of what the exact statistics are in terms of how many iPhones to Androids, it is interesting to see how that does affect the marketplace. There's a lot more devices, so if you're going for volume, sometimes that makes sense. But they definitely have more disposable income on average, I would say, on iOS.
I also think that, if I remember correctly, there was like a 2016 Pew report that they did where it was like 65% of adults making $30,000 or less used smartphones.
Right.
And then there was like 90% of adults making $100,000 or more. And so I don't know if that was part of the question too. But anyway, wanted to make sure that we got like a good round answer for that. So I definitely look up. That's the beauty of going on Google. Is a lot of times you can just look them up and find some of these exact statistics. So
amazing data out there.
yes, amazing information right at our fingers. Fantastic, the world we live in. So I want to thank you guys again so much for joining us today. Thank you to Dylan and Taylor and to MAKERMONSTER for being chamber members and for hosting this webinar. And for all of our chamber members listening, thank you again so much. And just a reminder, next week's Chamber University, October 5th, is going to be all about energy efficiency in the workplace, so ways that you can be more energy efficient with your employees and your employers as well. So thank you again, and we're looking forward to next week. Thank you.